Hello everyone, I'd like to welcome you all to today's Advisicon Academy training. My name is Mina Anquist and I'm a marketing assistant here at Advisicon. We are a group of authors, teachers, consultants, and technologists offering training in Microsoft technologies and project management and methodology. With attending any of our training sessions, we offer PDUs as we are a registered education provider with the Project Management Institute. At the close of today's session, I will give some instructions on how to claim your PDUs and how to contact Advisicon for any questions you may have. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few things so you know how to participate in today's event. Please review the control panel that should be on the top right of your screen. The audience is muted during the session, so in order to ask questions, you will need to submit them in the questions window of the control panel. This webinar will be recorded and uploaded on the Advisicon YouTube channel for those who could not attend today's session live. Please note that any questions or comments submitted will not display in the recording, nor will any of your personal information be shared. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's instructor, Dave Benz, who is our PMO lead, and who I will now hand this presentation over to.
Thanks, Mina, and welcome everyone. We're kind of excited to have this opportunity to give you some training today and to hopefully have a little bit, shine some light onto a sometimes confusing situation. So a little bit of background about myself. I am a project manager here at Advisicon. I lead our project management office. I have a background in managing projects across the IT spectrum and various other industries as well. But above all, I really love technology. And so any chance that I get to kind of dive in and play with new toys and tools is always a lot of fun. So let's go ahead and dive in. Today we're going to be, we'll do a brief overview of what SharePoint is and kind of the history, and then we'll kind of take a look at SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, and Office 365, and then we'll just jump right into kind of just a live demo of just kind of walking through. Kind of our goal for today is to give you some tips and tricks as a user of SharePoint as it's already configured in your environments and how to best utilize the various options that you have for managing, especially your files, is what we're going to probably focus the most on today. As Mina mentioned, if you have specific questions that you're coming to the webinar with, or if something that we go over sparks a question in you, please use the questions box to submit some questions for us to look at. We will have a little bit of time to answer some questions at the end of the webinar, as well as we always love just getting to know folks better and hopefully being able to provide some help and assistance there as we go. SharePoint itself has been around for quite some time now. As you can see, the first official version was launched in 2001 as a server product, and then over the course of the last couple of decades here, it's gradually been expanding and improving. And then right around that 2012 time frame is about when Microsoft started releasing more of the cloud-based Office 365 services and folded SharePoint into a lot of that online services. And so now there's kind of a dividing point between whether your organization has SharePoint installed as kind of an on-premise server or whether you're using Office 365 in the cloud. And there are going to be some significant differences there. What I'm going to be demonstrating today is Office 365, which is the cloud-based current version. If you are working for a company that has an older version of SharePoint, say you're on SharePoint Server 2010 or 2013, some of the functionality that we're going to demonstrate won't work the same way. Most of the features still are current, but you get at them in different manners. So what is SharePoint? SharePoint at its core is a web-based platform. It's kind of basically a place to build websites, primarily used to build internal network intranet sites, sometimes building public-facing sites, using teams, communicating in projects. It's at its core very social and designed to provide insights and analytics into your data. It supports the integration of custom applications as well as out-of-the-box templates. There's a store that has Microsoft manages that has applications, can be deployed, as we said, on premises or online through Office 365, and it's part of the Microsoft solution stack. So it ends up being basically the platform that a lot of these other tools reside on or are built on. So common questions that I get, particularly related to file storage, is why should I use SharePoint or OneDrive instead of my old file and network folders? And then if I am going to use it, when do I use SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams? I'm kind of confused. What's the difference? And so this is a really common question that a lot of people ask. And generally, I like to say that the primary reason to use SharePoint OneDrive is because you get that cloud or server-based storage that has a version history of your files. It allows you to collaborate with other people more easily and access your files from other than one location. You know, the classic, oh, I saved it on my desktop in my laptop and now I'm working on somebody else's computer, or my laptop died and now I can't access my files. If you're using SharePoint and OneDrive, you don't have that issue. So if we look kind of a little bit at the overlap, we look at SharePoint as kind of the back end. It's a collaboration platform. The access is controlled by group permissions that are set by your administrators. You can create custom metadata fields and centralize the control of all your permissions. And so basically, if you add somebody to a group, they have access to everything that's in that group. So it kind of makes sharing things a little bit easier. On the OneDrive side, OneDrive, the personal, like basic version of OneDrive, was built to compete with Google Drive, Dropbox, other similar cloud storage tools. And so it's kind of intended as the individual user's files. You know, as a user, you can choose to share specific files, specific folders, and there's much more limited customizations. When we talk about OneDrive for Business, which is the tool that comes with the corporate Office 365 tool, it is actually using SharePoint as its data storage. So when we say OneDrive for Business or SharePoint, we're kind of essentially talking about the same thing. There's not a huge difference there, other than basically OneDrive is more your personal files, and use the SharePoint folders if you are intending to collaborate with a team. As we'll see when we look a little bit deeper into the demo later, kind of going over the actual desktop sync tool, the OneDrive sync tool brings file copies down onto your desktop, and that connects to both SharePoint shared libraries as well as OneDrive. So there's a little bit of overlap there. What kinds of things can you do on a SharePoint site? If you've used SharePoint at all, you'll know that this page here that we're seeing is kind of a sample of what a brand new blank SharePoint site looks like. You know, you can add lists to your sites. There are different web parts that can have different applications, news feeds, and document libraries. Libraries is what we would call the document sharing areas in SharePoint lingo. So that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on today. When we talk a little bit about project management, and there's kind of a spectrum, there's no such thing as really a one-size-fits-all project management solution. And so as we see at the bottom corner here, you know, at the very basic end, you know, just kind of you're managing something in Excel. And then as you move up the spectrum, you might be using Microsoft Project or a similar tool. And then as you start going into team collaboration, we start doing stuff like using SharePoint. And we've got places where we can have common data storage. We can use Microsoft Teams or a project site, and so on and so forth as we move up the spectrum to greater and greater collaboration tools. In the project management lifecycle, you know, we might be using a SharePoint site to store documents related to our project. If we have a project charter or various contact lists or other documents that are put together, we can store them in the document libraries. We can have these task lists that can, you know, track what next kind of work people need to do. We have various other pieces, and a lot of these functions and features are starting to get absorbed into Microsoft's Teams app, which is built on top of SharePoint and kind of provides a little bit more user-friendly experience to access a lot of this data. All right, well, let's just get into it. So when we first get started here, let's see where my mouse cursor is. Our demo user here, Sarah, is logged into her Office 365 account, and as we can see in the apps here, we can go straight to SharePoint. And you'll notice when we first come to the SharePoint site, the main page, we have the list of some basic news of things Sarah might be interested in based on her activity and sites she's a member of, frequent sites, you know, list of sites that she's visited recently, and then maybe some suggested sites of like public sites within your organization that might be groups that she should be a member of. If she's following any sites, those will show up here on this list. So we're going to go ahead and drill into, first off, this webinar demo SharePoint site. Now this is pretty much out of the box, and this is what Microsoft refers to as the modern SharePoint interface. If you're using an older version of SharePoint, you're more familiar with probably a little bit more older style of web page called the classic interface, and there are some differences there that we've gone over in previous webinars if you'd like to check out and get more information on that. All right. As we're going through, you can see that on this main page by default, there's a little web part here that shows the documents that are part of this. And there's also a quick link here if we want to go to the documents page, which will show in this particular SharePoint site, the folders are arranged in a file folder structure. We'll give another example of a project site that's part of the Project Online system, which, by the way, Project Online is built on SharePoint. So a lot of it's basically an entire application that shows a significant amount of customization that can be done with SharePoint. Let's go to this document library here. As we can see, this document library uses tags and metadata columns to organize the data. And there's an ongoing, kind of difference of opinion between folks in terms of whether it's better to use folders versus metadata columns and tags. And honestly, if you're using a modern version of SharePoint, there's less of an issue with going with either method. The challenge with implementing a metadata columns tags scenario for your document management is that you need to be very consistent with using it. Because as you can imagine, with no folders here, if I had hundreds of files, it would be very quickly challenging to find whatever I was looking for. The advantage is that I can now group files by metadata, and then if I just collapsed, any of these, I can, kind of just show that particular document. They can be grouped, and you can start collapsing these, and essentially the tags kind of become like folders. But if these weren't tagged, you just have a very large group here that said untagged or none selected. So you can see where not having the folder structure here could be problematic if you weren't strict in adhering to it. One of the advantages that SharePoint has as well is a powerful search engine that you can access from a lot of different places. If you're on the primary SharePoint page, as we just went back to here, and say I want to look for a file called SharePoint, as we can see, the search as we type is automatically finding that, hey, there's a couple of SharePoint files that Sarah has access to. If I click the more results link here, since I searched this from SharePoint, it's actually pulling together a list of files that have this. It might actually see if there were any sites. Oh, it doesn't have anything because we didn't actually search the full word. But now you can see there's a combination of sites that have SharePoint in the name. We have files, folders, various other information. So that's a really handy feature. If you know part or all of what you're looking for but don't remember exactly where it is, you can search at this top level and find that information. One of the features of Microsoft Office 365 that's been really kind of getting a lot of press and a lot of expansion of users because it is so powerful and really kind of provides an easy access is Microsoft Teams. So if we look at Microsoft Teams next, we can see that each one of these teams that's here on the left side of my Teams window represents a SharePoint site. That is a SharePoint Teams site. So if we scroll down through here, we'll see here's that site that we were just on, that webinar demo. Oops, just collapsed it there. And within those sites, the Teams site allows you to create these various channels that can then, you can track information. As we go into here and we look at files, we can see that there's no files in this here, but this is actually the SharePoint document library for that team. If we go back over here to this site, we can see that there's the folder. So anytime we create a new channel in the team, what SharePoint's doing in the background is creating a new folder within that SharePoint Sites document library, and that's where it's storing all the files. When you want to access any of the files, what's neat is you can go in, when you by default click on a file, it's going to open that file in the browser. One of the key features of the Office 365 version of all of these apps now is these documents support collaborative editing, which basically means that multiple people can be in the document making changes at the same time, which is really powerful, as I'll demonstrate here in just a second. As we've seen that Sarah has opened this file up, what I'm going to go ahead and do over here in another window in my user account is we're going to actually let's do this in Teams because that's even easier. We'll go to that channel. You can see here I'm in Teams. I went to the SharePoint Tips and Tricks channel. In the file section, this is the same file that we were looking at here a moment ago. When I click on it, it opens it up here in Teams. I'll just click, edit. And now that I have this file open as well, as soon as it loads here in a moment, it'll say Sarah Davis is also editing this file. And what's really cool about this is not only can we both be editing the file at the same time, but I can even see who's editing what. So like, for example, if I'm on this slide, and I'll just toggle back over to Sarah, she can see Dave is also editing. And if she clicks on the name, you can say, hey, Dave is editing this slide. And now we can see that I'm editing this slide. If I was editing a particular text box, there would be a highlighted area around that. So this is one of those ways that you can do a lot of collaborative editing, both in the online as well as the desktop tool. Now, Microsoft has been really improving PowerPoint, Excel, and Word's online tools, but they really still just don't do as well as the desktop tool does. And so one of the neat things that you can do as well is there's always an option to open in the desktop app. And so when you've got a file open and you want to open it in the desktop app, you can go ahead and do that. Or before you even open the file at all, when you're looking at it in the list, there's an ellipsis over here on the far right that gives you options. I can either edit it in the Teams browser, I can open it up in a regular browser window for the PowerPoint Online, or I can open it in the desktop app. And these functions exist for Word documents and Excel files as well. One of the key differences, so Teams kind of provides a layer on top of SharePoint. If you find that you are using just SharePoint as more than you're using Teams, one of the things that you can do in the document library as kind of a power tip is, like, say, for example, I really don't like working in the online environment. I always want my files to default to opening to desktop only. Well, if I navigate to the document library in this SharePoint site, and over on the right-hand side here, we can see there's a gear right up next to the name for settings. If I go to library settings, and then over on the left column here, under advanced settings, there's a fun little option here that just says open in the client application. And so now when I click that option and scroll down and click OK, and then I go back to the document library, which also in SharePoint, there's this thing they call breadcrumbs, which kind of gives you a list of like where you were and where you're at, and you can always click on a higher level thing to go back to a previous setting. So we'll click on the breadcrumbs there to go back to the documents library. And now when I go to the SharePoint Tips and Tricks folder and click on this PowerPoint file, it's going to actually open it in the desktop application. And as we can moved over in my other monitor here, but move that over here. So now we can see it just opened it directly in the desktop application. So that might be a setting that you might be interested in changing on your SharePoint sites. I will note that unfortunately that does not carry over into Teams. So if you're still using if you're accessing your files in Teams, most of the time you will still have to click the ellipsis on the side there and choose to open the file in your desktop app if you want to shortcut to opening the file directly in the desktop. All right, onto the OneDrive app. Now, the OneDrive app is the sync app that allows you to basically sync files, a copy of your files, to your local computer. So if you don't already have it configured, the easiest way to find it is to just click the Start icon if you're using Windows 10, and just type OneDrive. And you see OneDrive app pop up here. If you've already got your folder configured, it might actually pop up this Explorer window. And if it does that, we can see here on the right, on the left side here of the column, where it says OneDrive Advisicon, there's my OneDrive folder. I can right-click on this and go to Settings. You can also do this from the OneDrive icon that's in your Quick Launch area of your toolbar. But as we're looking here at this account settings here, you can see this is my primary account. You can see how much of my OneDrive space I've used and which folders are using. And this is also showing an interesting thing here of which SharePoint folders I'm syncing. So a couple of things I want to point out here is, and we'll go over how to sync a new SharePoint folder momentarily here, but in the Settings tab, a couple of things to double check here is if you want OneDrive to continue keeping your files up to date, make sure that it starts automatically when you sign into Windows. I personally like having notifications when people share files with me, and I definitely like having that warning before I'm going to delete something that's going to delete from the cloud. Files on Demand, though, is one of my favorite features in the modern version of OneDrive because it allows you to add more folders to your computer than you might have space for. A lot of people nowadays have laptops or desktop computers with solid-state hard drives that only have maybe 250 to 500 gigs of storage space, and your OneDrive has a terabyte of capacity. And so you could very easily have more files in those systems than you could actually sync down. And what the Files on Demand allows you to do is it allows you to see the online version of the files in File Explorer, but not download them until you actually need them. And we'll show you what that looks like in a minute. Another functionality for your computer side is this backup of important folders. If you choose to enable this, what'll end up happening is it'll actually move your desktop files, documents, and pictures folders into OneDrive directly, so that now whenever I log into a computer with this account and connect this OneDrive account, it'll actually sync in and bring in my desktop file. So even if I just save a file to the desktop or to my documents folder, it will show up in the next computer that I sync to. A couple of things I want to point out in the Windows File Explorer here, you'll notice as we're looking at my documents, these files are all in my OneDrive. And you can see there's a difference here between the green circle with a checkbox on it versus the white circle with a green checkbox in it. And the difference between this is that the green circles are the files that have been downloaded but are only there temporarily while I'm using them. Files that have this green circle with the white checkbox in it have been selected to always be available offline. And what's nice about this is that if you find that you're working with some files and you always want to have them, even if your computer's not online, you can choose always keep this on this device, and OneDrive will always keep a copy of it. So as we can see here, here's where I said there's kind of an overlap between OneDrive and SharePoint. This icon here with the OneDrive is my OneDrive account with Advisicon. Up here where you can see kind of the server icon with Advisicon, these are all the SharePoint libraries that I've connected to. Now, as far as my computer is concerned, these are all basically the same thing, but these are my personal files and these are my shared company files. And we can see here an example too of these cloud icons indicate that most of these files aren't actually saved on this computer. There's just the online only versions of them. I decided that I always want to have access to the template files, so I enabled that one to be always saved on my computer. And then also some of these other files are the same way. Finally, the biggest reason, in addition to any of this, that you would maybe want to have, your files connected is the ability to access via mobile apps. And as soon as I can find this, I'm going to give a quick demo here. As we can see, this is actually a live demo of my mobile device. And we can also see that similarly to how it functions on the computer, if I go to the OneDrive app, I have access to the same files via the SharePoint libraries. Or on the left here, if I go to files, it's the regular OneDrive files. And if I go to just the general libraries, I can see access directly to any of the SharePoint libraries that I'm a member of, any files that have been shared directly with me by another user from their OneDrive. And I also have access to the SharePoint app, which will allow me to see the various sites that I'm a member of, as well as any of the files that I've interacted with recently. So here's an easy, you can see quickly that I can now have access to my files pretty much anywhere that I am, as long as they're stored somewhere in SharePoint. All right. Well, with that, I know we only have a few minutes left, and I see we have a number of questions that have come in, so we want to make sure we have a chance to answer them. So I'll just jump back over here. We'll kind of wrap this up really quick. Just kind of as a summary, we've looked at how SharePoint is a powerful platform for collaboration, and it really does power many of the core features in Office 365 and is at the heart of any of the document storage functionality. So we want to make sure that we're using SharePoint document libraries for team collaboration, and then kind of focusing on using OneDrive more for personal files. And then sync any of the files that you're using regularly to your computer and mobile devices through the OneDrive app. So with that, Mina, I'll turn it back over to you. Do we have some questions that we can answer?
We do. Our first question says, because it allows for collaborative editing, I've noticed when I make a mistake and it gets saved automatically, the undo option doesn't work. How do I go back to the previous item that I either typed over or deleted?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. So if you are using a modern version of Office 365 and you are working with like a file that's being collaboratively edited, there is an issue that you can sometimes run into where maybe you didn't intend your change to be there, and if the autosave function has already saved it, the file may be there. But one of the things that's part of the Office 365 now is called version history. So I'm in the desktop app right now, and you can see up at the top where the name is, it says last modified 7 minutes ago. If I click this down arrow right here, there's this version history option right here on the button, which will open up the previous versions that are here. Now, since I haven't made any changes here on this file and it's brand new, there aren't any versions here. But if you had made a change to the file and it had saved, it would show a version history. In fact, I can bring over a different file, a different version of this file that I have open. And we can see this file. As we open up its version history here, you can see all the different versions of the various edits and save times that have happened here. And what you can do is if you click any of these versions and you click the pencil on it, it'll download that version. And now that we can see that this, it'll show this version, and if this is the version that's got the changes in it that I want to save, we can double check and make sure that this is happening. It's got a read-only version of it here. If I decide that this is actually the version that I want to have happen here, I can click this restore option, and it'll then make this the main version of the file. What's really cool about that is it'll still keep the version that you had that had the other change saved as a version, just as an earlier version. So this is a handy way to be able to kind of see, who's made the changes and basically roll something back if an error happens. And so this is another really powerful version. Any file that you've got stored in SharePoint will allow for this version history feature. That's a great question.
And just an add-on to that, we have a question. Does doing this affect what others have done?
Yes, it does. So what's happening here, so as we talk about collaborative real-time editing, if I have this file open and Sarah has this file open and we're both making changes at the same time, the system will try to merge the changes together. And that's actually one of the features. There was a checkbox if you're using the desktop app, if for whatever reason the changes hit the server at the same time and there's a conflict because you both tried to change the same slide or the same text box or maybe the same cell in an Excel document, basically what the server will try to do is it'll try to see if it can merge the changes. But if it can't tell which change should be there, it'll actually just create another copy of the document, and then you can sometimes end up having to merge it together. If you're doing a lot of real-time editing together, it's can be better to work in the online version of the tool because the online version has a much better real-time save of the files. If you're using the desktop tool, there is a bit of a lag as it's doing, because the autosave isn't running continuously. It's just running every so often to continue as you're making changes to the file. So if there's a lot of changes happening simultaneously, it sometimes is better to do it in the online version because you'll more quickly see the changes that other people are making. I hope that answered that question.
All right, and we have another question. When you open a file in the desktop app, how are your changes reflected in the online version?
As soon as the auto, so that's part of when you have the file open, making sure that auto save is enabled. Every time the app auto saves, it's doing an upload of the changes in the background. So if I have the file open online as well as in the desktop, let's just go ahead and open this file online as well. Open in browser. Let's go to one of these that has some text in it. So if I have this file open in the desktop and I go here, I just say ask questions. And then since I want to force this to happen a little bit faster, I'm going to hit the refresh to save. And there we can see it's saved here. And so now when I go back over here, it might take a moment to refresh. We're going to just go ahead and reload this page to accelerate this. Now I forced this faster because I wanted it to happen quicker, but if you had been both working in there in probably less than a minute, it would have just automatically reloaded this information here, and you'd see these changes were made automatically. So I did force it by refreshing the page just to make sure that the changes happen, but if you were working in this document and somebody else was working in it, it would happen. As you notice, because of that lag, that is one of the reasons why I said if you have 2 or 3 people who are working in the document or more at the same time, sometimes it is better to be working in the online version because the changes will happen much quicker.
All right, and we have another question. How do I get OneDrive/SharePoint on my phone?
Fantastic. So the easiest way to do it is to go to your app store. I think, oh shoot, looks like my phone decided to disconnect. So whether you're using an Android device or an iOS device, if you go to your phone's respective app store and you search for OneDrive, there's just one app now. There used to be 2 separate apps for OneDrive and OneDrive for Business, and now they've consolidated them all. You just simply download the app and you log into it using your Office 365 credentials or your Microsoft account credentials, and that'll automatically give you access to all of your files. If you want access to the SharePoint stuff, you can do, it's the same thing. Just look up SharePoint in your app store and just install the app and log in.
All right, and one last question. If you would like to provide a copy of a document in multiple SharePoint libraries, is it possible to provide a link versus copy files to each library?
Excellent. So yes, within the library itself, that's a little bit more difficult, but what you can do is you can create links by simply generating a link to the file. So if we go back to this document here, if we just simply say copy a link, the easiest thing to do is to share the file, which will generate a share window here, and then that'll create a link that you can specify what the permissions are. You can allow editing or block the download. And then once you've created that link, you can email it to people. If you want to create a persistent link within the SharePoint site, probably the easiest way to do that is on the home page, and you can just make a link to it. Just adding a link via, various other places. Generally speaking, cross-linking files across team sites, you want to be careful that people actually have access to the right that they have a need to access that, because typically if you're creating multiple teams, you've got different user groups and folks there. If you have some files that need to be accessed by lots of people, that's maybe a consideration for creating a team or a SharePoint site that has a broader audience and storing those kind of files there. As you noticed in my team's directory, we have several groups here, like I have an Advisicon Inc. channel that gives me access to all of the corporate level files, and then I have the various other teams that I'm working on, whether it's my professional services group or the PMO or the various other departments that we have.
All right, that's all we have time for today. If your question wasn't answered, we will make sure to get back to you. I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. We welcome your questions and feedback. For more information, you can email us at contact@advisicon.com. Once you exit today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation. You will need to complete and submit the survey to receive your PDUs. From there, you will receive a follow-up email within 2 business days with your PDU information. On behalf of Advisicon, Dave, and myself, thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you participate in future webinars. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.